Hello everyone, we welcome you all to this week Tech Tuesday webinar on Informatica Cloud Integration Hub, Architecture and Use Case Demo. Today's speakers are Ankit, who's a Senior Solutions Architect, and Ananya, who's a Solutions Architect. Before we start the session, let's go through some of the housekeeping tips. The webinar is for 1 hour that includes 15 minutes Q&A. You can post your queries in Q&A box, which will be answered at the end of the presentation. All participants will be muted during the presentation. The session will be recorded and it will be available on our InfoSupport YouTube channel and Success Portal, where you can download the slide deck. Please feel free to submit your suggestion or feedback for this session in the post-webinar survey. The Success Portal is a micro-learning platform that offers free, unlimited learning to all the registered users. This feature-rich platform helps you learn and adopt to Informatica products better. The following are few important links that you can go over later. This will help you in your product adoption journey with Informatica. Over to you, Ankit and Ananya. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. This is Ankit Tripathi, Senior Solution Architect with Informatica. I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Ananya Venkat, who's working as a Solution Architect. Today, we're going to talk about Informatica Cloud Integration Hub, and we'll try to give you a demo around the CIH APIs. We will also talk about what IDMC as a platform offers you and how CIH fits into picture. We will also talk about challenges with point-to-point integrations. There is a new offering with file mass ingestion, another microservice within Informatica or IDMC. We're going to talk about it in detail. As I said, CIH REST APIs will be covered, followed by a small demo. And at the end, we will have a question answer session. Now, let's look at what IDMC is. IDMC, as the name suggests, it is the Intelligent Data Management Cloud. It is the single and most complete platform you will ever need for cloud-native data management. Informatica IDMC helps organizations deliver on their digital-first initiatives and build a competitive edge with these critical attributes. Now, if you look at this particular slide, you will find that, or it may be very familiar to our already existing customers. Under IDMC, what we have done is all the microservices which you see, which is CDI, Cloud Application Integration, Cloud B2B, Cloud Data Quality, and etc. We have made all these platforms available under the bigger platform, which is IDMC. All these offerings are given to you as part of the microservices platform architecture, which we have under IDMC. The one which is highlighted, which is Cloud Integration Hub, can be tightly coupled with the Cloud Data Integration Hub as well as Cloud Application Integration. We will also talk about one scenario where CIH can be used via Cloud Application Integration, and then how Cloud API management can be looked upon to apply governance model on the APIs which CAI exposes. Now, let's look at certain challenges that the companies are facing these days with the point-to-point integration. The first one being cost per integration going up. Now, as too many developers start working on the point-to-point integration, they might start doing hand coding, or maybe use a third-party tool to complete those point-to-point integration. Your sources or resources are being drained with multiple point-to-point integrations being created at a time. With SaaS application, you will realize that the data transfer fees and API call charges are going up as your point-to-point integration increases. The second challenge being the data loss causes business to slow or stop, sometimes because of network bandwidth and how limited it can be. The data loss happens and it delays the whole process. The data loss or delay occurs as tightly coupled applications fail and stop communicating. The downtime getting costlier by the minute. The third challenge being suboptimal integration design, delaying time to market. Business users do not have access to the right data at the right time, so they're not able to go ahead, or their time to market increases. They're not able to bring systems on board fast enough because they're not really aware of how the data is sitting in certain application. Data stored is very far from the consuming applications, which actually is delaying their time to market again. Now, let's look at how cost per integration is going up with a very simple example. When you start your point-to-point integration, the first couple of integrations might look like this, where there is a source, there's a target, and you have a couple of transformations, applying the business logic to it. Your second integration will still look a little simpler, where you might have added one more source and a little bit of a transformation logic gets a little complex. At this point of time, you will not have many number of connections. It can be your sources or your targets. With your maybe your third point-to-point integration, you will start realizing that you have created a lot many connections and your transformation logic has become more complex. By the end of 6 months or maybe a year, depending upon your development realization method, you will end up with this particular hairball sort of a situation where all your integrations are looking very messy. The number of connections which you have is going beyond what you had expected initially. It's getting hard for your developers as well as your team leads to get hold of how many integrations you have done so far. Then you rely on your hand coding, or not hand coding, but your manual efforts of creating an Excel sheet to make sure that all your integrations are recorded in that Excel sheet to be able to go or backtrack as to what has been done so far. So point-to-point data integration architecture increases the number of connections and the cost associated with it. The second reason being cost is going up due to integration. Let's assume one scenario where SaaS application is providing data for many of your initiatives. It could be your analytics dashboard, which is running on that SaaS application. Your ERP system is also getting that same data. Data warehouses is being built on that same data again. And you are maybe storing that data in a local database or archiving it in some cases. Now, typical to any SaaS applications, every time you make a call to these applications, it is basically an API call, and there's a cost associated with it. Now, there are limitations as well. On the API calls, it could be daily, it could be monthly, but at the end of the day, what is happening is one set of records or maybe one set of objects which you're trying to pull from your SaaS application gets pulled by 4 different applications, where if you had a point-to-point or if you had a hub and spoke sort of an architecture, this could have been easily avoided, where you would only pull the data once from your SaaS application and your consuming applications would pull the data from the hub repository, which we're going to talk about in a short while. Now let's look at another reason why point-to-point integration poses challenges. In most of the cases, it is an incomplete solution. Let's take an example of an e-commerce integration with ERP. It is usually one small part of a bigger puzzle of order and customer management process. So if you look at it from an enterprise architecture perspective, point-to-point integration is a very small solution to a bigger problem. Let's say order and customer details between 2 systems can be done with a point-to-point integration. It is good enough, but when a simple initiative of handling customer loyalty points come into picture, you need to keep a track of customers' orders with another system which handles customer relationship, which could have been implemented maybe because you wanted to give point system for the new customers for the buying that they do on the e-commerce site, or it could be for your existing customers who you would want to make sure that they are tied to your e-commerce system for a longer run. Now, this generally means you either buy or develop another point-to-point integration, because now you need to integrate the customer loyalty points with the customer relationship system. Now you can do that, but this overall solution or overall mechanism of keep creating point-to-point integration could have been avoided if hub and spoke architecture was implemented. Now, what is hub and spoke architecture? It is a pattern which allows you to go from point-to-point integration, which essentially means that you will have 10 sources and 10 targets, which eventually is going to cost you 100 connections. But with the hub and spoke architecture or an integration pattern, you will be able to have only 20 connections when you're trying to integrate 10 sources and 10 targets. Because now you are introducing one integration hub or a hub and spoke architecture where your source application will be publishing the data into hub, and your target application, which will be called as subscribing applications, will be subscribing the data from hub. So you will be decoupling your architecture. Now, what is Integration Hub? Integration Hub accelerate data-driven digital transformation. With Integration Hub, you are able to reduce integration costs and improve productivity. You will be able to increase the speed up time to your market. Also, you will be able to build resilient and reliable data maps. You will be able to see the lineage as to how the data is moving from one application to another. It's a self-service platform which increases agility and puts data in the hands of business quickly. In terms of visibility, it has greater visibility and control of data. It reduces the number of interfaces each application has. These are some of the features of Integration Hub, the most important one being decoupled architecture, which is basically means that you have siloed sources and targets. Now you're publishing the data into Integration Hub and your subscribing applications are registering for that data, which is published. It is standardized data access with canonical topics. You have the authority of hosting the publication repository with Informatica, or you can have your own private publication repository. And you can see there are like a number of features which are highlighted over here. We're going to talk about them in detail with the next set of slides. With this, I will pass on the reins to Ananya Venkat. Over to you, Ananya.
Thank you, Ankit. So let's take a look at the CIH architecture. As you can see, this is hosted on IICS, and this can be fully on cloud, or it can be in a hybrid mode with on-premise and cloud connectivity. So you as a customer can choose to use a hosted or a private publication repository based on the functionality that your organization requires. So this layer, the publication repository service, decouples the source and target in batch and API processing, enabling your publishing and consuming process to be completely decoupled. And this is how we support multi-latency loads. The diagram that you see on the right, the first part of the diagram where the publication repository service is hosted and managed on IICS hosting services. The hosted repository is highly secured and it is compliant with SOC2 compliance framework, and the data that is stored in the publication repository is encrypted both at rest and also in transit. While the second part of the diagram, what you see is the publication repository service being hosted on a customer managed infrastructure. And now let's talk about what is a publication repository service and what are its types. The CIH, or Cloud Integration Hub, it stores the data that applications publish to topics in the CIH publication repository. And this data is only temporarily saved until it is consumed by all your registered subscriptions and also until a predefined retention period is completed. Now, talking about its types, you do have the hosted publication repository and the private publication repository. So as we saw in the architectural slide, the hosted PRS, or the hosted publication repository service, is hosted and managed on IICS infrastructure or the IICS hosting services. You can use the hosted PRS to host a relational database. And for an on-premises secure agent, you can use a hosted PR to host a file store publication repository. And then you have the private publication repository service, which is hosted on the customer managed infrastructure. And this can reside on premise or on your organization's private cloud. So when you store your topic data on premise, the private publication repository must reside on Oracle or Microsoft SQL or the MySQL database. So a relational PRS stores relational data for subscribers to consume, while you can see something called as a file store publication repository as well here. So a file store publication repository stores files as is for subscribers to consume. You can use a file store publication repository when your publications and subscriptions run file ingestion tasks. Moving on, let's talk about the CIH user interface or the CIH homepage. So what you're seeing here is the CIH homepage that you see once you log in to the Cloud Integration Hub microservice. Towards your left, you see the navigation pane where you can create new assets, you can explore existing assets, you can perform any actions on existing assets, or you can track events and so on. And towards the center, you see the hub overview diagram, which is giving you a visual overview of all your existing assets like applications, topics, publications, and subscriptions, and also the relationships between them. So these are all clickable links. So when you rest on any specific asset, all the related assets are highlighted as well. So say, for example, you're clicking on a specific topic, it shows you the applications and publications that publish to that topic, and also the subscriptions that subscribe to the topic. So all the related assets are being highlighted when you rest on a specific asset. And when you click it on, you should be able to see a lineage view or an end-to-end data flow. And you can see all your assets out here once you click it on. So towards your right, what you see is a view filter where you can filter the assets that your hub diagram is showing you. So it's a drop down where you can use any of these filters to filter the assets that your hub overview diagram shows up. And also towards your top right, if you are on a hosted publication repository, then you should be able to see the repository storage or the repository usage as well towards your top right. So moving on, this slide just gives you the glossary of terms within Cloud Integration Hub, applications, topics, publications, subscriptions, publication repository, the different assets. So we'll be talking more about each of them further through the presentation. Let's begin with understanding what applications are. So applications, basically they exchange data through the hub. So to put it simple, it is a container for your publications and subscriptions. So it's basically any entity within your organization that needs to share data with other applications in your organization. So an application can publish data to a defined topic, and it can also subscribe to data from a topic. So what I have here is the hub overview diagram of the user interface of CIH. So these are all existing applications, topics, publications, and subscriptions. So let me pick up any existing applications. So I click on that particular link and I get a lineage, and from there I click on the application and I get to see the details of this particular application. I see the publications and subscriptions that are tied to this particular application. And as you can see, multiple applications can publish to the same topic, and multiple subscribers can consume data from a topic. Next, let's move on to topic. I'll go back to the hub overview. And so as you can see, a topic is any entity that represents a domain that is published and consumed in CIH. So to publish data to CIH, you first start by defining a data set, right, that you want to manage. And you define that data set by defining a topic. So a topic defines the structure of data that CIH stores in the publication repository, and also the type of publication repository where it is stored. So you can manage multiple topics that represent different data sets in CIH. So let me click on any specific topic here. So you can see the details here as to the topic diagram, and you have other general details that are relevant to the topic. And sorry for that, yeah. And you have something called as the retention period. So a retention period is nothing but the number of days that a published data set is persisted in the hub. And this is applicable for both consumed and unconsumed data. And as you can see the information here as well, the data retention period for consumed data must be between 1 and 90 days. And for consumed data, this starts when all the subscriptions have either successfully consumed or discarded the data. And for unconsumed data, as you can see, the retention period must be somewhere between the retention period for consumed data and 90. And then you have something called as the topic structure. So a topic structure is nothing but a set of tables that are associated with a specific data domain. So overall, applications can publish data to topics and subscribe to data sets that are represented by topics. Now, the next asset that we can talk about is publications. So let me go back to my home screen to show you the same. So here you can see publications. So what are publications? These are nothing but entities that define how various applications publish data to the CIH. And this includes the type or the format or the schedule of the data publications. So as we had seen, publications publish data to topics, and multiple publications can publish to the same topic as well. Now, let me click on one specific publication to show you the various options that we have to publish data or files with CIH. So you have an option to publish files as well. So I'll open another two different publications. So when you look at this, you do have publishing. You do have a publication method of publishing data with DI task. So here a DI task is defined for this specific publication, and when the publication runs, the CIH server would trigger this DI task, which thereby retrieves the data from the publishing application. The source data will then be transferred to the CIH relational publication repository. And this is mainly for your batch loads to specific topics. Now, when you click on the drop down, the other option that you see is publishing data with an API. So here, the CIH, you do have the CIH publish data API, which would publish data to a specific topic on the relational publication repository. Now, you can do this from Cloud Application Integration. Now, I have opened another publication as well, just to show you that we have another option of publishing files with file ingestion task. And point to keep a note is that this is applicable for file publication repositories. So in this publication method, what happens is when the publication runs, the CIH server would trigger the file ingestion task that is defined for this publication. So here the source files will be transferred as is on the CIH file store publication repository. So when you click on the topic, or when you look at this specific topic, right? Now let us just explore this topic. If you have a look at this corresponding topic, you should be able to see that this topic is associated with a file store publication repository, and that is the reason you can trigger a file ingestion task with this publication. Now let's go back to the hub overview to see what the next asset is. So the next asset that we can see is subscription. So subscriptions are quite similar to publications, just that they operate the other way around, right? So these are entities that define how applications consume data from CIH. And as you may now know already, subscriptions subscribe to topics, and you can have multiple subscriptions consuming from the same topic. And similar to a publication, you can define a subscription that is based on an API, or that is based on a file mass ingestion task, or that is based on a DI task. So let me look at a specific subscription. So as you can see, the consumption method can be either through a data integration task or API or a file ingestion task, and the recommendations still remain the same. You can consume data with DI task when you have to consume batch data into files, applications, and repositories. And you can consume with an API when for high frequency or event-driven subscriptions. And you can consume files with a file ingestion task when you want to consume files as is to a target location. So those are the different consumption methods. And when you're consuming data with a data integration task, you have something, as you scroll down, you can see something called as retry policy. So retry policy is something where this just defines the number of times CIH retries to run the subscription in case of a failure. And this is very specific to a DI task, and you can have up to 9 retry attempts with a retry interval between 5 minutes and 23 hours. And this was specifically designed with business continuity in mind. So that's about the subscriptions. So now that we have seen various assets within CIH, let us specifically look at one among the publication and consumption methods, and that is through file mass ingestion. So as you have seen, Cloud Integration Hub uses file ingestion tasks to publish files as is from the source connection to CIH file store publication repository, and to consume files from the file store publication repository onto the target. Let us pick a specific topic to discuss more about this. So here I do have this topic open. You can see the topic diagram, and within the general details, you see something called as a publication repository type, which we spoke about. So here you choose the file store publication repository, and data retention we did speak about a while back. So it is just about the number of days that the data is retained within the Cloud Integration Hub. And you also have two publications and 2 subscriptions, as you can see, associated with this specific topic. You can see 2 publications and 2 subscriptions. Yeah, so let's talk about specific publication here. So when you look at this here, when you create this publication, you have the publication method. So here, point to keep in mind is you should have chosen file store as your publication repository type within the topic so that you can enable this appropriate option of file ingestion task here in the publication method. Because if you are enabling the relational publication repository within your topic, then you may or may not see this specific option. So that's a point to keep in mind. And you can enable the appropriate application that you have created, the topic, and the task. So the task here is a file mass ingestion task. So this expects you to have created a file mass ingestion job for publication and a file mass ingestion job for subscription as well. So let me open my mass ingestion microservice. So here I do have a publication created, job created, publication file mass ingestion job created. So this is simple 4 to 5 step process with which you can create this job. So while you're creating the publication, point to keep in mind is your target is a parameter. It's a target file directory parameter. Your source can be here in this specific example is a local folder, but your target, it has to be parameterized as a and you can do this by just clicking on add parameters and then using the target file directory. And you can enable the appropriate actions and runtime options as per your needs, and then you can save the job here. And once you have done that, and once your job is valid, you should be able to see it in the drop-down list in your publication. So here, once you select this particular job, this particular file mass ingestion job, you have associated the file mass ingestion job with the specific publication, or you have defined the job for the publication. And once you've done that, once you scroll down, you should be able to see a couple of scheduling options. So you can choose to run this manually, or you can choose to run by an external trigger, which means that you can run it by an API, or you can call a REST API that starts this application. Or you can even choose to run by schedule with the options that is given to you out here. So with that, you should be able to create a publication. And let us look at a subscription, which is associated with this topic. Yeah, so here as well, you should be able to see the consumption method. So the same guidelines apply. You need to consume files with the file ingestion task, and your repository type should be the file store publication repository. And you can associate a specific application and the appropriate topic for this, and then the task. So here as well, this expects you to have a subscription task created in file mass ingestion. So within your file mass ingestion microservice, you can create a subscription task, which is a file integration task. You can just click on new and file ingestion task, and with the 4 to 5 step process, you should be able to create a subscription task. You should be able to create a file mass ingestion task for subscription. So here, when you're creating the subscription, point to keep in mind is the subscription source directory must be a local folder with by file list as your pickup option, and the source parameter added as well. And then you can give the appropriate target, and here is a local folder and any appropriate actions that you want to perform, any runtime options, and then you can save the job. And once you have saved the job here and the job is valid, you should be able to see it within the drop down out here. And once you've selected the job that you would want to give as a subscription, it means that you have defined as a file mass ingestion job for the subscription. And once you've done that, as you scroll down, you should be able to see a couple of scheduling options, which is similar to publication, just that you should be able to see an extra option of, run this subscription when published data is ready. So which means that when the publication is completed, when data is published into the file store publication repository, then run my subscription, then run the subscription. So you do have details given here as well. So this says run the subscription immediately after the published data is ready. So this is one scheduling option that you can choose, or you can again choose to run it manually or by means of an external trigger, which just means run by API, or call a REST API that starts the application. Excuse me. Or you can even choose to run the subscription by schedule. So with this, after creating your publication, subscription, application, and the topic, with this, you have pretty much set up your data flow here and with the Cloud Integration Hub. And you should be, your Cloud Integration Hub should be pretty much in a good shape to manage your data sync here. So with this, I hand it over to Ankit. Thank you, everyone, and over to you, Ankit.
Thanks, Ananya. This brings us to our next topic, which is Integration Hub REST APIs. As a platform or as a microservice, CIH is very much robust in terms of how it allows you to trigger a certain publication by an external application. So there are APIs to trigger publication externally. Even if you want to expose or publish the data directly to the hub repository, there are data APIs both for publication as well as consumption, which is basically the subscription side of it. Overall, there are 7 set of APIs which are exposed by CIH microservice. We will try and look into some of them, or probably try to talk about it in detail for about 3 of them. The first one being the Run Publication Subscription API. You can use this one to start a publication or a subscription, including the ones which have been disabled. These return an event ID, which is generated at the CIH end. You can use these REST APIs whenever the underlying mechanism of publishing the data into CIH repository is basically done by data integration or by file ingestion task. Second one, Publish Data API. These are the APIs which you can leverage to directly publish the data into a CIH repository. You can use these APIs with publications that publish the data with an API. Consumption data API, similar to Publish Data API. These APIs consume data directly from a topic on the CIH repository. You can reconsume the data that had previously been processed by triggering the subscription complete event with the API. So in terms of flexibility, as I said, it allows you to reconsume the already published data. It also allows you to reprocess an event which has failed previously. So as I said, in terms of flexibility, it's great. One more API probably which is worth mentioning over here is Event Status API. Now, let's say, for example, you trigger a publication and it is using a data integration task. That means CDI mapping is triggering or pushing the data into the hub repository. It might not happen at the same instance. So that's when the first publication API or a subscription API gives you an event ID. You can use that event ID to get the status of that API so that you can mark the publication process from whichever application you are sending the data from as complete whenever the status of that event ID is completed on the CIH side of things. Now, let's look at one of the scenarios which will showcase all the APIs which we just discussed in detail. For the demo purpose, let's have a look at one typical scenario where CIH can be implemented. So a SaaS application is publishing the data. There are 3 applications which want to subscribe to the same application. So essentially, maybe throughout a day, the publication event will be triggered once, and the subscribing application would get the access to the data at whatever latency and whatever mechanism they want to get the data subscribed to. Now, if you look at this publication, you will find that this is being triggered or using a data integration task at the backend. But the whole orchestration, how it would look like is this publication needs to be triggered manually, and that is where our APIs will come into picture. I will talk about the subscription a little later, but I'll also tell you one more scenario where publication can be used. So have a look at this particular scenario where one application is sending the data directly to the hub repository. But if you look at the publication asset in detail, you will find that the publication method that is being used over here is through API. So if I look at the Swagger structure of this API, which is exposed by CIH, we will find that it is following a close resemblance to the topic structure which the CIS repository has. So you can see over here that the contact ID, the first name and last name is something which is very similar to the topic structure which we have in the CIS repository. I'll quickly go into the detail of it. So if you see this, I have the topic structure where a table is created, and that table is using column ID, first name and last name, which is similar to the Swagger structure which we had created, or CIH had created when we use the publication method as an API. Now, let me go back to the integration hub. So what we were planning to do was, on one scenario, we will be triggering the publication, which is using the data integration layer underlying. And on another scenario, we will be using the data API to publish the data directly to the CIS topic. For this, I'll be using Postman as my REST client. You can use your preferenced REST client. Now, if I go here, I will find that I'm making a post call to the CIH URL. This URL is generated in conjunction with the pod where your IDMC is posted. And in addition to that, we have publication and start, which basically means that the API is using, or the API is being used to trigger the publication with the name, and another request in the body could be run disabled. Now, CIH platform allows you to trigger a publication which is disabled as well. So that's the reason, and that is where the property of run disabled comes into picture when you are trying to post a request to this particular API. I'll quickly go ahead and try and post this. And what I should get is basically an event ID of the CIH publication, which gets triggered on the CIH side of things. So it has given the response as the response code success and the event ID as 1553. If I want to cross check as to how this has happened or how this has triggered the CIH application is, if I go back to CIH microservice and go to events, I should find an event which got triggered, which is basically the publication, which is sending the data to this topic. Now, the status of this right now is in progress. I'll keep on refreshing the page so that we get the latest update on what has happened to the publication. Underlying mechanism of publishing the data is, as I said, data integration task. So if you want to have a look at that particular task as to how that is performing, you can always go to monitor side of things on the IDMC platform and look at the latest running jobs on the data integration side of things. Right, bear with me for a second. Yeah, so this has completed, but the consumption status, as you see, has been put as delayed. Now, if I expand this, what I will find is the loyalty system application has started subscribing the data, which basically means that the subscription was set up for whenever the published data is ready. So whenever the publish or publication was completed, the subscription started working. Now, the second publication or subscription which we want to trigger is basically the courier service subscription. If you remember, we had set this up to be manually triggered. So we are going to use the API of subscription to be able to trigger this particular subscription. If I go to my CIH sub, I've set it up again already, which is basically using the subscription URL and the start for the subscription to be done. On the body, instead of the publication name, which we used for triggering the publication, I will be using the subscription name, and I will provide the subscription name on the CIH side of things. Now, if I go back, I'll probably should be able to see that the one subscription is completed. So we will trigger the second subscription quickly. And we'll wait for the subscription to start. Now, I know for a fact that this particular subscription should fail because it is trying to post the data into another API, and that particular API or the REST API is not really up and running, and it is not available at this point of time. So as we thought, this subscription has failed. So what we saw so far is basically run publication and subscription API, which are using the data integration task as the underlying layer to publish the data to CIH repository or to subscribe to the data from the CIH repository. Now let's look at another publication, which is basically posting the data directly to the CIH repository. This one. As I said, I've already set it up. Now it has contact ID, first name and last name, which we saw in the Swagger structure of the API exposed by CIH. Now, this API, again, just like others, it is posting the data to the hub repository. It has the suffix as publication. In addition to that, as we are sending the data directly, the URL contains data at the last end, and the topic is basically or the publication name is also part of the URL, and it is posting the data directly to CIH repository. I'll quickly go ahead and send the data and go back to CIH to see if there are any events which got triggered. Not yet. It has posted the data. We had posted one record, and the event ID is ending with 773. I'll quickly go back and hit the refresh button now, and I should be able to see. Yeah. Okay, this is the one. Yeah, this is the publication which has posted the data. The topic is SFDC contact, and the publication name is Ankit Pub contact. If I want to see as to whether how many records it has processed, I can quickly go to processing information and would see that the success rows is 1, and that is exactly the number of rows which we had posted via the Postman application. Now, in terms of publication, we have basically talked about two APIs. One is publication triggering REST API, and the other one is posting the data via publication data API. Now let's look at the subscription side of things, where the subscribing application is using the API method to consume the data. For this, I'll quickly go back to my original scenario. If I can, yes, I can. And if I open the billing account subscription, it should tell me that, the consumption method is consuming the data with an API. Now I've already set it up, so I'll quickly go there in Postman application, and the consuming application or the data API, which is using the data via the consume data API, requests a body which basically tells you that whether you should be requesting the complete data or all the published data which has been posted into the topic, or you want the oldest published data from the topic. So for this particular purpose, you can use this property as the request body, which tells you that I'm basically requesting for the data which is a complete set of published data to the topic. I can quickly go ahead and request the data from topic. Ideally, it should give me around a number of records which were posted. We had only posted once to this particular topic, so it'll only give me 24 records which we had published the data into the topic. If I quickly want to cross-check, I can cross-check on the events page, where on the published data, I should be able to see 24 success records, right? Okay. For this particular purpose, what we did was we requested the data from the topic, the complete data set. So we had flagged it as true. Now let's assume that you had processed the data once, right? And the consuming application wants the data again. So what can be done in this scenario is you can change the request body of the data. Now we wanted to reconsume the already published data. Now, scenario could be the subscribing application wants the data again because they want to do some more processing on that same data. What they can do is they can request for the same data again. For this, what they'll have to do is they'll just have to change the request of the body. And here you will provide the request type at reconsume, and the event ID should be the event ID of the subscription event which was triggered previously. For which, what you will do is get to the CIH side of things, and you will copy the subscription event ID, through which you will be able to reconsume the data. Ideally, it should give us the data back, and the response should be 200 OK. Yes, it is 200 OK, and we have gotten the same data again. So this is another consume data API which can be used to get the data from the CIH topic directly and not by the data integration task. Now, coming back to the scenario where we talked about CIH being tightly coupled with CAI and the API manager. Now, a typical scenario could be you still want your third parties to publish the data to the topic, and your subscribing application can get the data as per their latency. So what you would want to do is you want to create a wrapper on top of the publish data API so that you can give all your publishing application the authority to publish the data through that API. But there would not be any governance applied to it because you're using the CIH exposed data API, published data API directly. If you want to apply any governance logic onto it, like for example, you would want to add authentication type, X number of authentication type like JWT or OAuth through Roto, or even if you want those API to be triggered via certain machines only, so you would want to apply some filter criteria on the IP addresses which they can call the API from. You can do that via an API manager, which will allow you to again provide any governance model on the API which you just exposed. For completing this particular scenario, what you can do is through CAI, this can easily be achieved. So essentially what you're doing is you're calling the publication data API within CAI through, again, the API integration process, which CAI is known to be able to do, for which you will first have to create a service connector. And on top of it, you will create an application connection. That service connection or service connector as well as app connection will then be used in process flow, which will then be exposed as an API. So I've already created the process flow, which will publish the data into the CIH repository directly through the publish data API. For which, for this one, what I've done is I've used the process object within CAI, and through the process object, I am supplying contact ID, first name, and last name. This can easily be parameterized so that you are getting these values as input parameter for the API, which is eventually going to be consumed. But for the demo purpose, I've hard-coded it, but it can easily be converted into a dynamic API where you're providing input values. Now, on the service step of CA process flow, what I'm doing is I'm calling the publication data API, which will post the data as the body, and the response will be the event or the subscription event which gets triggered. I will quickly go ahead and run this. And it should be able to trigger a subscription event, one more subscription event. Yes, it has. Now, this subscription event is basically the one which we just triggered through CAI. So again, if I want to look at the processing information, I will find there was one success row, one was pushed into the target. Now, coming back to the overall use case as to how you can build this or expose this API through the API manager, it's again very simple mechanism to do it. So remember this name. I will copy it for the sake of being it very simple. I will copy it. I'll go to my API manager and I'll go to my API registry. On the API registry side, I will look for this particular API. Okay. Yeah. So if I want to expose it as an API or a managed API, what I can do is I can click on the 3 action dots and I would create a managed API. Now, we discussed about the authentication method which you want to apply, because the out of the box API which is exposed by CIH only supports basic authentication, which in the real world uh, may not be enough for your API integration to complete, because you would want to apply more security layers on the API being exposed, for which you need to be able to create a managed API either via an API manager or via the API manager exposed by Informatica Cloud. Now, if I want to see the details, I can go into the publish data API and see all the properties. And one of the important ones, which we talked about, is basically the authentication method and being OAuth to auto, and also JWT JSON Web Token. It also allows you to download the SDK kit in whichever language you want. We support a number of languages, so that your orchestration through any other language through which you're orchestrating the whole flow can be easily embedded into that. And another IP filtering, which we talked about, is something which you will do in policies. You will keep on adding the IP addresses from which you want this API to be called, and no other IP addresses or machine should be able to call this. So you keep on adding your IP addresses here. So that can be configured very easily. And you just go ahead and save it. And then this exposed API, you can easily share it with your public publication applications, whoever or whichever application you want the data to be sent directly to the topic, which then can be consumed by your subscribing application very easily. So this is the whole scenario where CIH, CAI, and CAI API manager is tightly coupled together in order to complete the whole use case. With this, we complete the demo on which we have tried to showcase run publication API as well as publication and consume data APIs effectively, and also be able to explain how CAI as well as CIH can be used in conjunction with the API manager to carry out your use case of publishing the data directly to the topic of publication repository. Again, please feel free to browse our documentation page, where you can look at the details of Cloud Integration Hub, the APIs which we talked about, cloud application integration. Again, this might be useful for our customers who have never used cloud application integration and API manager. And I would request or urge you guys to please reach out to your CSMs if you want to get a deep dive understanding of how all this can be orchestrated or how it can be implemented with the use of CIH, CAI, and API manager. Thank you so very much again. Bye-bye.
Hi all, we have reached the Q&A part. Please post your questions. Do we have any questions? Thank you, Ankit and Ananya, for presenting today's webinar. We request audience to take up the survey and let us know your thoughts. Today's webinar will be available tomorrow on Success Portal under the Resources tab. With that, we will end today's webinar. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everyone.